I die, 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 die. I die, 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 die. I die, 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 die. I die, 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 die. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yehallelu Sela Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yehallelu Sela. Hopeful, dwelling in the one, home is in my heart. Hopeful, dwelling in the one, love is in my heart. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yehallelu Sela Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yehallelu Sela. Hopeful, dwelling in the one, home is in my heart. Hopeful, dwelling in the one, home is in my heart. Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yehallelu Sela Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Od Yehallelu Sela. Claiming hope, dwelling in the one, home is in my heart. Claiming hope and dwelling in the one, home is in our hearts. And since they call these things Zoom rooms, welcome to the home in each other's hearts. Welcoming each other today. Rabbi Shawn here for Live and Learn, a series we have been doing for the last few months now, covering a wide range of areas in the Jewish life and year cycle, but particularly focusing on issues that have a racial justice component or connection to them. And we've been, for me, the philosophy of expertise is broad and deep as opposed to hierarchical, meaning that often we go for the known experts or the people on the circuit or with the book. And yet one thing I have learned to great gratitude in the years serving here at Mishkan Shalom is I'm so grateful to be in a community that I continue to get to learn from. Yes, we all bring something to the table, but just those of you who are already on this call and many of our members are living their personal and their vocational lives, embodying the values that we seek individually and collectively. And today is no exception. So I'll just use that as a ramp on to bring in Ellen Tichenor. Ellen, to my great delight, and I got many years on the board. In fact, when I first came in, she was stepped into the VP role with her portfolio being me. I think that's one of the first things we said, hi, my name is Ellen Tichenor, I'm your handler. And that has been true through your presidency of 3 years. And of course, your beloved Abby Reuter, who's here today as well, preceded you in the presidency some years before. And Ellen's background has been in the realm of being an activist from the civil rights era right through today, and also a consultant in helping transform organizations and work with them to realize their own missions and their potential. Your CV would use up at least a half an hour before I got to introduce you. So we'll leave it to the anecdotal conversation that way. And just to mention, as you did in the notes you sent me and I sent out too, that along with Abby, you have an adopted daughter, Eliza Reuter, African-American Jewish, amazing woman in her own right, and also a member of Mishkan Shalom. And with that, Ellen, I just want to invite you to say hi. And as we've been doing, just to give us whatever's on your heart right now. You know, it doesn't have to be like the PowerPoint version or hitting all the points, but when you think of your own Jewish journey, spiritual journey, and that which brought you to Mishkan, and since then, what's been important to you along the way? What things, you know, have been formative for you?
Thank you. I think first I'll say, as we were talking about before people came on, that Eliza is our daughter. She's not our adopted daughter, she's our daughter. We are indeed a family formed by adoption. We are indeed an interracial family. We are indeed a real family with two moms and a kid and some brothers out there in LA. And Eliza has more of a family than us. So it's a kind of a, in some ways we're a tribe. So my journey, you know, it makes sense to me. I don't know that it makes sense to, well, I think it makes sense. I grew up in a household that practiced Judaism. We were members of Road of Shalom, fairly upstanding members. My mom was the principal of the Sunday school for a number of years. And I don't think, you know, I actually went through confirmation as well. And I don't, you know, I loved it when I was younger. I loved walking into the synagogue and I loved the music, even though the music was a Presbyterian choir, I believe. But I had some formative events like we all do in our lives, and mine was around, you know, my first encounter with real understanding and encounter with injustice involved the death of somebody who worked for our family, whose daughter I played with. And when this woman, whose name was Sarah Green, had a heart attack, the hospitals that she could get to wouldn't take her. And I don't know if I've ever gotten over that. I don't know if I've ever gotten over that, but it certainly, I began to look at, you know, my religion and really pay more attention to the words, and see the gaps, you know, the gaps between the conversations at family gathering tables and what was being taught from the Torah. I also came of age in the 60s in the civil rights movement. I got very involved there and moved away from Judaism, and in fact felt that in some ways, and I think I've said this before, in some ways civil rights kind of became my religion, you know, and the relationships and the connections that we made there were our congregations, and in some ways are again, you know. And it was, so gosh, there's so much to throw in there, but I was dissociated from Judaism for many, many years, to the point where I didn't want to raise my children as Jews. I'm sure I was angry, but I was more just kind of, why? What's the relevance here to the imperatives of our time, and the injustice we were both seeing for the first time and also wanting to stop. We always celebrated holidays with my parents. Sometimes we celebrated them with groups of friends, but certainly when I had children, which was early on, it was pretty soon after I graduated college, it was pretty right away. I got much closer again to my parents, and so the kids understood Judaism as something that was part of me and therefore part of them, but we didn't go to synagogue. In fact, I spent a lot of time going to Quaker meeting, went to the back bench that George Lakey founded, and just places where I could feel the connection between the values that I was holding of pursuing justice and the actions that people took, which I did not see in my synagogue of origin at the time.
Is there, can I ask you, since you raised it, and as always happens, I'm, as much as you and I have walked side by side these years, I'm already learning a half a dozen things I never knew before, or the nuance of. And so, your natural progression and what was that soul path for you in terms of the civil rights work that even brought you down south and actively involved with civil rights in the 60s. Do you remember what it was that was the compelling? Was there a particular moment, or you talked about Sarah before, but in terms of your saying, this is where my soul is leading me right now. And after we can talk about, how this thing called Mishkan Shalom brought you back into this orbit. But I'm wondering about that, if there was a pivotal moment or moments.
Thanks. There were a couple that I remember, some quite personal, and I suppose all personal in some way. One was that in high school, I had a couple of very close friends who were African American, and my parents were nervous about them coming to our neighborhood and our house. And I think they were nervous about how it would look to neighbors. And that was shocking to me. It really was shocking to me. I think my parents learned a lot from my own activism, truly. My dad lost his security clearance at RCA and regained it, and my mom got back in touch with what it was like to be a teacher in the McCarthy era. But at that point, that was really shocking to me when I was in high school. And I'm sure these things happened earlier, but I remember consciously rejecting them, deciding I was going to spend more time with my friends Barbara and Linda away from home because I couldn't be with them at home in the same comfortable way. And I think the other thing that happened was I started with the Philadelphia Friends of SNCC group. Somebody invited me to a meeting. A guy named Clarence Harris. I don't remember how I met him. I have some high school friends who say, I changed their lives because I took them on their first demonstrations or whatever. I don't remember that. I don't remember that I haven't always been doing this stuff, but I do remember that with my parents and my friends. And I remember walking endlessly with Linda Taylor, my friend, one friend who was African-American, when Kennedy was shot, the afternoon Kennedy was shot. We sought each other out. We were in college, and I had started at Temple, and this was before I went to Penn. And we just walked and walked and walked. And we had both joined a youth group at this place called Fellowship House, which was a human relations sort of think tank, community building place in North Philadelphia. It's actually a pretty important place. Martin King came there often actually, when he was at Crozer and when he came to Philadelphia for things. He would come and meet with a woman named Marjorie Penny, who founded Fellowship House. But it was when Kennedy was killed and Linda and I were walking that I decided I wanted to move into Fellowship House. I wanted to move in and be part of a group of people who went into schools and to teach tolerance and sort of helped set up the first Human Relations Commission in Philadelphia. And so I know I must sound ancient, but it really wasn't that long ago that,
Well, as I'm hearing,
segregation wasn't that long ago.
As I'm hearing you, the thing that occurs that, this piece that can both be deeply distressing or alternately hopeful, that aspect of these things cycling back around again. So here we are in a pivotal moment of some deep division in our country, and many of us looking to find our place, even those of us who are actively in response and trying to preserve democracy and getting out the vote and even hitting the streets and doing active trainings. Where is one's role in this? And of course, we're, this hopefully will be archival and people may be bemused, but in the middle of a pandemic on top of that. And I'm just noticing people asking themselves the questions as you brought that snapshot back from you and Linda, and then your choice to do that, asking themselves the question now, that they have never, as one white clergy colleague of mine said the other day, this is the first time that they had been faced with the feeling of the absolutism of this moment, and acknowledge that as a piece of white privilege, and having the option to not even have to face that on a daily basis, leaving the house. But I wondered, as you look back on these, not so much nostalgically, but as formatively, and a lot of people thinking, okay, well, how do I, or where do I fit in this moment? What can you draw on from that you think speaks to this moment for people to do, almost like you said, you can't even remember yourself not. It's almost, there was a, not that it was without consequence, but almost an effortlessness. No, this is happening. This is where I need to be. I'm involved with Philly SNCC and then I'm down south, doing activism then. What do you think you can draw on to tell us now to inform people in that question themselves?
Well, first I want to say I'm asking the same questions.
Yeah.
There's several things. I did some pretty good work, pretty far out things. I was part of the sit-ins on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. So the other night when we were when Reverend Edwards was telling us about, he worked with Jim Lawson and telling us about sit-ins, it was like, I could feel it. I could feel in my body what it was like to sit there at the counter and suddenly get hit by something. And so, it's bringing back a lot of stuff for me in a very visceral way. And I realize, and I think I've realized it for a while, that that at that point in my life, and I think in many of our lives, danger wasn't it was a concept, but it's sort of like, unless you take it in, like nonviolence is a concept, and unless you are really trying to embody that and enact it in your life. But danger was not something that I knew how to take seriously, even though I trained for it, even though we did role plays, even though, you know, I don't know that you can take it so seriously until you're in that situation and you realize your own grounding. So that's one thing. I think it's important to train, because I think it's important, you know, I think it's important to be explicit about your values and your aspirations and who you want to be in these moments, so that you can remind yourself, but also, you know, remind yourself of your values of others. Because for me, when I was at lunch counters, when I was on marches, when I sat on top of a helicopter at the Boeing plant in Vertal, in Springfield County, what I needed to remember was that I believed in the goodness of other people. And I needed to tell myself that over and over, because it took me out of my fear and to a place of choice, I think, or closer to a place of choice. So that's something I've just been thinking about very recently, because I just did this nonviolent training. Let me think. Oh, I guess the other thing I want to say broadly is, I think my experience is useful. It's certainly formative for me. And it's no substitute for anybody else's experience. That is to say, people have to make their own history. And I'm constantly sort of wrestling with this idea of, like you said, not nostalgia, not like, oh, I want to tell you about the time I led a role play for a weekend of people being attacked. You know, it's not, to distill what you've learned from that. One of the things I learned is that if I tell you about that, it isn't going to help you in the same way. I mean, it may help you to know that, oh, somebody went through this, but we're all making new history all the time. And just because we know about something doesn't give us a privileged position in it. It gives us grounding that hopefully we can share with other people. But and I think that's been a lesson I've just learned over and over. And it's a good lesson. It's a good thing to know, because you kind of open up to the next generations and the next and you step aside. You try to step aside from your privileged position and make room for the newness, because it's a new history. It's a new iteration. So I guess those things are on my mind lately.
It's really, having been through the same training, you know, that you have, that's really helpful, actually, to speak that into the now. And also, I think part of what I was hearing and what you were saying is be proud of or have learned the lessons of the past, but don't just rest in them as well. Or I've been this, or I've done that. For everything I've done in my life, the trainings themselves surfaced some awareness about, oh, I might not be the best person I think I am in X role. Oh my goodness, I actually have capacity I didn't even think about, once I was in another role. And so, whereas other people came in going, let me out on the streets, and like, oh, now that I experience it, I realize I need to be, on call for someone. And other people who were rather sheepish are now have found their legs by virtue of it. So that narrative that, like you said, we're creating our own history, we're also, the self is evolving with each choice that we make as well, kind of like we hold the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people. So there's that pivot point. And if I can pluck you into the wormhole and jettison you, into the late 1980s, as you laid out part of your early life and then this work, clearly there's a moment in time where Mishkan comes together that seems to, I feel a little bit like This Is Your Life host, where, where these pieces come together in a way that you can say yes to this on a more holistic level, and not, well, my soul path is over here, not over here anymore. And the Judaism and the activism come together. Can you speak a little bit about, what that was for you and still is?
Yeah. I don't know if any of you ever read George Litzett's book, The Possessive Investment in Whiteness. I've just been thinking about my possessive investment in movements, how we're tied to it as identity in the way that people are tied to whiteness as identity, whether they're poor and destitute, they're still white, I think that I have and probably continue to be possessively invested in the movements that grew me up, that helped to grow me up. But I wasn't consciously looking at the things that grew me up before I was conscious of helping to grow myself up, the things that we sort of take in, the good and the bad. But one of those things certainly is my Jewish heritage and early training. And so I guess the simple answer is that I stayed away from Judaism, even as I got to know a lot of activists who were Jews who I worked with and respected. And but then I fell in love, and Abby was really searching for a synagogue, and I don't know if I was searching for a synagogue. I think I was searching for, kind of a rootedness. But we knew, because we knew Rebecca and Christy, and we knew about this rabbi who people said, it sounds like a Jesus story, doesn't it? We heard about a rabbi
His name was Brian Walt, for the record.
Yes,
I don't know
right.
what nicknames he went by, but yes, that was the name he used. Yes.
Yeah. Who sort of was putting together activism and Judaism, and we went to a service. Was that the first one at Swarthmore, I think? And I was blown away that here was a white man who was talking about civil rights and the imperative to bring about justice as if his life depended on it. And and I won't say I'm not an easy joiner. I won't say I was like this immediate convert, but there really was a dawning in me of, oh, this could all fit together. This doesn't have to be you're this or you're that. This could be a unity, and that's what brought me to Mishkan. Brian brought me to Mishkan. Abby brought me to Mishkan. Let's see, I guess by the time Eliza was born, we had just been at Mishkan not very long. Our baby naming was there. And was I traveling a lot for work then?
Don't worry so much about the specific details, or you stay in the flow of the insight.
Well, I'm trying to, I began to get involved, but I got involved in things that interested me. I went on marches that the new sanctuary movement, or I got involved in the race class something committee, and created a course in white privilege. And so those were things that I could do. And it turned out I could also help with some conflict resolution, and not that Mishkan had any conflict. And so behind the scenes is, I guess Abby was more forward about engagement and leadership. And behind the scenes, I was, I have to take the rap for a lot of the parlor meetings, sorry. I was doing some consulting and I guess a little sort of coaching and organizing of whole synagogue events that dialogue kinds of things. So I was trying to help Mishkan work better, and work and sort of be part of us realizing ourselves as a community. Just before you came, there was some upheaval, and I think Lynn Iser, Mordecai, somebody asked me to be on the turnaround committee, and then out of that, I got asked to be on the board, and I didn't leave. I said, "Oh, I'll do that for a year." Being this cautious joiner, and really not knowing if we could make it, and not wanting to get stuck in it, but to do what I could to help. So that's kind of the progression. And what I found as I got more and more involved was community, and how much I really enjoyed learning, Jewish learning, which I would not have known. Nancy, you knew me then, So I think that I was still growing myself and still am.
Well, I'm thankful that perhaps you use the metric instead of the standard system, because your 1 year, or maybe it was actually the canine system, because your 1 year on the board equaled 6
Yeah.
in other years, and
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, including 3 years as president, and the blessing that I feel I had about us walking through many fire walks together as we face many issues, and thankfully not in terms of upheaval within the community, but just dealing with both issues external, whether it was racial justice, Israel, Palestine, having our being a landlord, and dealing with things that would, arise there, members' needs, expectations, and so on. So I wonder where, on the other side of this, as we face a pivotal moment in the history of our country again, that you're 7 years later, here you are, having been through this leadership role and now being involved in the ways that you are now. I've kind of wondered, we sometimes step into the place and find our holism, like the integration you were talking about. And then it's always an interesting question that's not a final zone. So what is it to actually find that place and become, write the story, as you were saying now, and where does that bring you now, having actually found that home and that combination and being involved as you are and as we face together the unfolding and unknown future?
That's a great question, and I think that I'm wrestling with some of those things, because I think having been as involved as I have been at Mishkan, and there's a couple people on this call who can probably ratify this. Stepping back is an important moment and an important thing to do. I see Rod's on, and he also was president. And so, I stepped back at a moment when we were all sort of kept back, and
because of the pandemic and us not being in the building by conscious choice.
Yeah. So in some ways, I was kind of cut loose, and in a way I wanted to be, because I wanted to just find my footing in some new ways. I'm not sure that I thought that we would be here. Maybe nobody did. I didn't think we would be in this place where we're physically separated, though we are inventively together, while we're trying to make a major change in the leadership and the demeanor and of the leadership and the values that are forward in this country. And of course, I don't kid myself that that Joe Biden is the answer. So all of this is new, but I've gotten very involved in voting rights, and I'm doing lots of stuff with Mishkan and lots of stuff elsewhere. And I'm kind of looking to what happens next, and sort of reconnecting to sort of more of my earlier activist life. It's very different to do that when you do think about danger, when you do think about what your boundaries are. Not, the civil rights movement wouldn't have happened if people thought about that. If when you went into a high school in Montgomery, Alabama, and you walked through the high school and the middle school, if hundreds of kids hadn't gotten up and come out with you, because they weren't thinking danger, they were thinking some North Star, they were thinking freedom. We're in a moment like that right now, and Mishkan is my community that that is, that I want to work with and move with in that way, towards, bringing about a beloved community that's larger. So I'm wrestling with the questions, and I'm touching back to where I come from. But we also have such a foundation, a sort of communal foundation, a foundation in purpose, I think, for Mishkan. And so I feel a lot of strength in that has yet to get totally galvanized and aimed, but we're on the way, and I want to be part of that.
It's beautiful. Thank you, as always, for your Torah, Ellen. It feels like a good place, that you just completed a piece here. And in something you said at the end, I so appreciate you. I kind of schlepped you onto this election working group team, and you graciously showed up at the call without asking what, why did you ask me to come onto this? Because I knew I wanted you there. And you were the one that said, not in a like, oh, let's go back there, but let's remember, like we do with our Torah texts, our sacred texts, our tradition, balance the legacy and the innovation and what this moment calls for. And so you were the one that plucked from our statement of principles that I used, in the letter that introduces the various resources we created, words that, I'd read them before, but when you put that sentence about who we as a community are and our commitment in the society to justice and being available to preserve democracy.
Not acting on justice is perpetuating it into something.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that was just
acting on injustice.
It was a reignition for me on that way. And we use that, line again to tell people, this is why we're here together in this moment. This reawakens us in this moment, as opposed to, well, it's nice that we have that, but what do we do now? And it's often that unmooring that leaves us more vulnerable that way, even if we have to redo or upgrade, the language and the ideas, and that's certainly a road ahead of us. So I just want to appreciate you for that sometimes you, for me, also model what I aspire to the leading up front and the leading behind, which I've been talking with many clergy and other leaders about right now. When the question is, well, what am I going to do? That may be a little bit limiting. How am I going to be of service now? And that may be, behind Black clergy colleagues, or that may be up at front, or that may be in this role or that, and I can still have a place, but absence is not an option because that actually allows for a vacuum. And it's like not voting is a vote. I understand the complex reasons. I've been listening to many people talking about that, but the part of the way I frame it is, you actually never not vote. You may not put a ballot in. And if you don't put a ballot in, you are voting for whoever other people vote for. So there is not really a neutral zone in that regard. And so I just, appreciate that you're holding down that place. And also, and I want to invite other people. You can shoot something in the chat now if you've got something for Ellen as we come into our last portion today. Something you and Abby have also modeled so often is your mentoring. So, it didn't matter who it was. It might have been a new member or somebody or a new formed family or whatever it was. And I would mention something and, oh yeah, they were over at our house the other night. But, I haven't even met them yet. They're already over at your place, for dinner, and the kids you're looking after the kids, or, there's a young person or the child of a member, and that you and Abby have taken under the wing somehow. So I just really appreciate the way that you have modeled mentoring and support that way, not just for the people that may be closest to you, but that you've continually, I feel, kept an eye on those people that both need a home. Like I started with the chant, hope is in my heart, home, is in my soul when I claim that. So I just want to appreciate that for you. You may follow my lead, if that's not too much leading the witness, to talk about the role of, mentoring and lifting other people up, which you've done so much as well, or just leave it at that. But I wanted you to have the option and nudge you in that direction.
Mm.
And maybe you just do it naturally, Ellen. I'm not saying that it has to come out of some grand philosophy.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know. Do it naturally. I see being on the board as we have to replace ourselves. That's our big job. I'd like to do more of that, to tell you the truth. So I'm a little bemused that's where you put me, and I'm thankful.
I got a note from the future that said, please alert Ellen of where she may be heading soon and dress accordingly. So
Yeah,
duly delivered.
yeah, thank you. I don't think I want to say more about that right now. Yeah,
go ahead, Ellen, sorry.
Well, I looked at the chat and I noticed that Judy said that RS, Road of Shalom, is more progressive now. And I want to say, I know that, I go to power things there, and it's very nice to see it. I remember going there, taking Abby's mom there, and she walked in and said, "Oh, it's the opera," because right? But it's a people's place, much, much more. And I'm really delighted about that.
Well, it is a great blessing to live in a time where you're not the only show in town. I mean, when we formed in 1988 and beyond, to be, LGBTQ, Jewish or not, or a multi-faith, multiracial family, or feel that Palestinians had the right to self-determination along with Israelis. I mean, these were, in many places, they still are hot button issues. We can't kid ourselves, but we're not the only place in our larger Philadelphia community that holds some of these values. And even some of them are pushing the envelope, some of the newer communities more so than we are in other levels. And that's great. And we can't think that this is the way the whole world is, that there is still, I find, a very vibrant and important purpose in what we're doing. And when 25% of us are the participants in the training that you and I are talking about, it says something, and other people notice that. And they say, well, I showed up, but, oh, who did I think of bringing with me? Or, how deep does this run? Because each of us can become the activist or the spiritual one, or, the teacher, etc. But our tradition says so much about looking for leaders around whom more leaders are raised up, not just followers. Acquire for yourself a teacher, a compadre, along, and Lador Vador, from generation to the generation. So, I think writ large, that mentorship piece is hardwired in the Jewish approach that, if we're only for ourselves, what are we? But if not, us, then who? And working that balance. So something you wanted to say to that?
Well, yeah, I think there's a tension. I've experienced the tension in my roles in Mishkan. There's always going to be a tension between bringing in new people, new blood, new generations growing up, and what we were formed to be. And who sort of the who we are question. There's a lot of tension in that question. And for me, I don't know if it's mentoring, it's important that we come from our roots to whatever the branch is, whatever, however high it is, that we don't just say, well, everybody has a different way of responding to, fascism in the country or whatever, but we say, we stand for this, and everybody can find a place in that that's not the same, but we are a thing. We aren't a whatever, For me, that's been part of, I don't know if that's a mentoring thing or just a principle for me.
I think that's really important. And sometimes people you know, in my experience and having worked for the movement as a representative for so many years, even misunderstood the Kaplan's thoughts or the Reconstructionist approach as being anything you want it to be. And I would often say, well, it's everything is possible, but it's not anything goes. There is actually a there. There's a core philosophy and values. There's a through which these ideas pass and the questions get asked. And that's why we are not necessarily everyone's place of landing. You know, because if you want to just drive through, it's, you know, you can have an opinion or whatever, but it's not anything goes. And balancing that with how we treat one another, just the same way that Gemilut Chasadim and Tikkun Olam are of one branch in our community of our statement of principles, you know, the acts of caring for each other and also the repair of the world and living into that, not just as a, you know, aphorism or I had the last round, can I pass the baton to you? You take this one up front. You know, I've got the infant at home. I mean, that's all important with that. And like you say, knowing that at the same time, it's not, well, whatever you want, and let's just come together for a nice kiddush every now and then. You know, like there's actually a reason that we're in this covenant together, even as we find our place within it. That's the way what you said speaks to me.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there's anyone else from our studio audience here that has a question or a reflection. As our practice, I'll pause the recording button when that's shared, and then if Ellen has something to respond to it, just to you know, allow for privacy and respective sharing in this, since it's not just it's not a public mutual support group here. There actually, you know, is a particular future audience that we don't know. So I'm just wondering if.
Yeah.
After all these years at Shaw.
And I think reverence plays a role in my life. And I have come, in Mishkan, I've come to love the prayers over again. It took me a long time because at RS, everything was pretty much in English. And pretty much that reform book in English is actually kind of poetic, but it's, you know, got its problems. But, and so I enter things a lot of times audibly. I enter through music. I enter through the, I mean, words of prayer have a power for me that you know, that's not like, I don't know how to say it. It's really important to me, and and I have learned a great deal in my Mishkan life about prayer, and I've always kind of loved Hebrew because you don't really always have to know what it means, which is kind of sometimes a good thing, right? But I've been studying more. I've studied Musar for 12 years now with you, and I study Zohar, and so I've gotten. I love the place of prayer among us and in strengthening who I am and then who I am with others. And I love the Jewish, the easy word is history, but you know, this sort of the depth of what's in the prayers, the depth that it comes from. So you're right, I didn't talk about it, and I thank you for asking, because you know, that's where I do touch into what matters. And I do.
Nancy helped you.
My bravery is, I guess.
Nancy helped keep you complete the trifecta of our statement of principles. So we touched
Study.
Tikkun Olam, lifelong learning, and now Avodah, sacred service and prayer. So you're fully formed in that regard.
Never fully formed.
Fully formed for the next level, yes.
Right.
Anybody else have anything that they wanted to reflect back to Ellen or ask?
Back at you.
Well, thank you for your comment, Lance. So that does provoke a question in me, which is, for you, Ellen, and as we wind down here, but that aspect of reaching for a goal, right, and having a clear sense of mission, and also tracking relationships as co-arising and not secondary to that. For me, that's also a very important piece, and that I witnessed you too. So I wonder if you could just say something about what that is for you or how you see it, so that we can also pay attention and not fall in the trap that we create collateral damage on the way to the specific justice issue, or create breaches all around because we're going after this particular. So that relational aspect that you've devoted so much of your life to, while having a purpose. It's not just, oh, let's hang around and I'll feel good. That's not the work that you do.
Early on in the peace movement, I worked for the Committee for Nonviolent Action that Reverend A.J. Musty started, and he's the guy who said, there's no way to peace, peace is the way. And so I think there is a goal, and then I think that's the what, and then there's how you get there. And I think the tension in us is always the reach versus the sweep, and not even versus, but I guess I'm thinking about tensions today somehow, but that if the goal is a goal about justice, then it's not just a goal for you. It involves everybody else. If the goal is a goal about well-being of a synagogue, it's not yours to reach. It's ours to reach together. And I also think that there's a tension in people about whether to do things alone, be individual achievers, or do things collectively. And I'm not one that thinks one is better than the other. I'm one that thinks, if they're like this and you have the arrow that goes up towards the top of both of them, that's the kind of balance. You use that word, Shawn, that is really important, that you're kind of maximizing your reach, and you're maximizing you're doing all you can do as an individual, and you're connected while you do it. I think you're terrific at that. I struggle with that sometimes, one part of it or another. Sometimes I just want to be in the crowd and lay back, and sometimes I want to walk ahead and go there because I can see it, so I have that. I struggle with that, and in some ways I think we all do, but we find different peace with it, or different balance points, or maybe they're conditional, different ones for different moments. I don't hear what Cindy was going to say. Is that okay?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to Ellen and to Rabbi Shawn and to Mishkan. And it's just, for me, it's so heartwarming to see my old friends and to be able to connect in a little way during this time.
Well, echo Cindy's words, and Shana Soferet, who's a new admirer of yours as well, just appreciating everything you shared. And your gateway into Tikkun as well. And as you were sharing that last piece, which I feel is so profound, Ellen, in your view of, you know, striving for holy and whole integrated life, that the phrase "Letakein Olam" came back to me, you know, which every prayer service ends with "Letakein Olam b'malchut Shaddai" in the Aleinu prayer. And it's a lofty phrase, "Letakein," to rebalance or repair or renew the world for the sake of the divine or transcendent or the greater truths. And it's aspirational, and it hopefully brings us to pull tomorrow closer to today, to bend that arc instead of just waiting for it to somehow magically, organically come towards justice. And I've always taken a lot of inspiration from the fact that that phrase does not appear in the liturgy for the first time, but rather comes from the Talmud and the sages trying to do the right thing. And in fact, it's, you know, relates to unjust behavior towards woman, and I think in a divorce case and reparations and a whole variety of things, that the idea of tikkun comes from the real lived experience and injustice that's happening, like, you know, in my house or the house next door. And that tikkun, that spiritual chiropractic, as I like to think of it, realigns the universe at the same time. And each of us, as you have done in your life, you found different gateways at different periods of time, you know, at home or out in the world. And now as you're, you know, looking for where the future calls as well. But I just wanted to bring that idea of what it means, letakein olam, in that regard. It's not so, as the Torah says in Devarim and Deuteronomy, far across the sea or up in heaven, but in our own hands and in our own hearts that way. And I think part of the Jewish imperative says if you leave that in the realm of ideas and calming aphorisms, then it's actually a blind spot. And it leads to a shattering, or often a unwelcome wake-up call, as we would say in Jewish mysticism, the Shvirat HaKelim. The vessels break under the weight of just thinking of that as an idea. And or we can do macro systemic work, and as you and I have often talked about, and then, you know, be blind to the microaggressions taking place within our own synagogue or church or company if we don't think that letakein olam means this immediate relationship in this moment, as well as the, you know, fighting white supremacist systems, you know, at large, or work, or being the peace that we seek, as you alluded to before. So we'll end as we began with Ashrei, and because it feels also like a fitting chatima, feeling appropriate sealant to save as Reb Zalman, I love the way he would say it, is like that the chatima or the bracha at the end of a prayer is the save as on the hard drive of your soul, and make sure that you save as your own neshama in your lifetime as a legacy for others. So thank you for spending the time with us today, and to adding to all our softwares as well. I've got a little bit more to save as on the hard drive of my neshama based on, you know, the life program that you shared with us today that is constantly being you know, upgraded and changed. You and we are not a fixed point. So thank you again, Ellen, so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So let's all just take a moment and think for ourselves of one place of ashrei, of gratitude, of the sense of being grateful for the isness of this time and what we've taken away from this exchange. We want to take into the home of our own hearts and move forward with in our day and in our life. Ashrei yoshvei beitecha od yehalelu chasela. Ashrei yoshvei beitecha od yehalelu chasela. Hope, hope, hope is in my soul. Hope, hoping in the one. Home is in my soul. Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha. Od Yehalelucha Selah. Ashrei Yoshvei Veitecha. Have a blessed day.